The wedding that cost me $12. 8 million chapter summary. On my wedding day, my billionaire father publicly disowns me for marrying the man I love instead of the wealthy fiancé he chose. In front of nearly 300 influential guests, he strips me of my inheritance, believing poverty will send me back. My mother stands beside him, my younger sister quietly celebrates, and I leave with nothing except my husband's hand in mine. Unknown to everyone in that ballroom, my late grandmother had prepared me for this moment long before it arrived. Target word count, approximately 800 words. At exactly 4:17 p.m., my father stood in the middle of the ballroom and erased $12,800,000 from my future with a single sentence. The crystal chandeliers above us sparkled against polished marble floors, while nearly 300 guests fell into complete silence. CEOs, judges, politicians, philanthropists, and investors had gathered expecting to witness the wedding of the year. Instead, they became witnesses to the public execution of a family relationship. My father adjusted the cuffs of his custom tuxedo before looking directly into my eyes. "If you marry that man today," he said calmly, "you will no longer be my daughter." His voice never rose. It did not have to. Everyone knew that when Victor Brooks spoke, entire companies changed direction. I simply looked back at him. My heart was racing beneath the ivory fabric of my wedding gown. But years of growing up inside his world had taught me something valuable. Power often depended on who lost control first. I refused to let that be me. My fiancé, Marcus, reached for my hand without saying a word. His palm felt warm against mine, despite the cold air drifting through the grand ballroom. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a venture capitalist. He wasn't the polished executive my father had spent 2 years trying to force into my life. Marcus was a black public high school history teacher who believed every student deserved to feel seen. To my father, that made him invisible. "You still have time," my father continued. "Walk away now, and everything remains yours." He glanced toward the attorneys standing near the stage. "The $12.8 million family trust, your executive position, the penthouse in Manhattan, your investment portfolio, all of it." A murmur swept across the room. Every number had been carefully chosen. Every sentence had been rehearsed. This wasn't anger. It was strategy. Across the ballroom, my mother folded her hands neatly in front of her designer dress. "Naomi," she said softly, "love doesn't pay bills. Families build legacies, not fairy tales." Her words landed harder than my father's ultimatum, because she smiled while saying them. Just beyond her stood my younger sister, Vanessa. She wore champagne-colored silk that perfectly complemented her lighter complexion, something my mother had admired all afternoon. Growing up, people called Vanessa the face of the family. I was told I had strong features. It sounded like a compliment until I became old enough to understand the difference. Vanessa avoided my eyes for only a second before looking toward the attorneys. I recognized that expression. Expectation. She already knew what was about to happen. My father removed a folded document from a leather portfolio. "As of today," he announced, "all assets previously designated for Naomi Brooks will be transferred under the amended trust." He paused. To Vanessa Brooks, polite applause echoed from a few uncomfortable corners of the ballroom before quickly fading away. People weren't celebrating. They simply didn't know where to put their hands. Marcus squeezed mine once. That tiny gesture grounded me more than $12 million ever could. "I suppose this is the part where I'm expected to panic," I said quietly. My father gave a disappointed smile. "No." He straightened his jacket. "This is the part where you learn reality." For a brief moment, I almost mourned the man I wished he had been. Then, I remembered something my grandmother used to whisper whenever she brushed my hair as a little girl. "Never confuse someone's wealth with their wisdom." The memory settled inside me like calm after a storm. I looked at Marcus. He didn't ask whether I was certain. He already knew. "I've never been more certain of anything," I told him. Our officiant cleared his throat gently. The ceremony continued, not because the room approved, because love had quietly refused to ask permission. Marcus smiled through tears he refused to let fall. "I promise," he said, "that there may be seasons when I can't buy you diamonds." A few guests exchanged amused looks. "But I'll spend every day making sure you never question your worth." My chest tightened. Not from sadness, from certainty. When my turn came, I didn't look toward my parents. I looked only at the man holding my hands. I don't need a fortune, I whispered. I need peace. The vows ended. We were pronounced husband and wife. No orchestra swelled. No family rushed forward. Only scattered applause from friends who understood courage when they saw it. Marcus and I walked toward the ballroom doors together. Neither of us looked back. Behind us, conversations erupted. Some predicted we'd be divorced within a year. Others estimated how quickly we'd run out of money. They believed they had witnessed my greatest loss. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because hidden inside a small cedar box in my apartment sat an envelope my late grandmother had instructed me never to open until the day my family chose wealth over me. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had absolutely no idea what Grandma had already placed in my hands. Loving, a man everyone called poor. The first morning in our apartment didn't begin with the sound of a housekeeper opening curtains or an assistant reminding me about meetings. It began with the smell of coffee. Marcus stood in our tiny kitchen wearing an old gray t-shirt, carefully pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs he had found at a neighborhood thrift store. The morning sunlight slipped through thin curtains, painting uneven lines across the worn wooden floor. "I'm sorry we don't have a fancy espresso machine," he said with a smile. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug. "I've never had coffee made with this much love." He laughed softly. "I think love is free. That's why it's priceless." Those words stayed with me long after breakfast. The apartment wasn't impressive by anyone's standards. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should. One cabinet refused to close completely. Every passing train rattled the windows just enough to remind us how close the tracks were. Yet, every evening when Marcus came home from teaching history at Roosevelt High School, the apartment somehow felt like the safest place in the world. He always asked the same question before talking about his own day. "How are you really doing?" Not, "What did you accomplish?" Not, "How much did you earn?" Simply, "How are you?" Growing up, no one in my family had ever asked me that. In my parents' world, value was measured by performance. Love arrived attached to expectations. Approval came with conditions. I remembered being 12 years old at a family gala. My mother had adjusted the sleeve of my dress before quietly saying, "Navy blue suits Vanessa better. It brightens her complexion." Then she looked at me. "You'll have to wear stronger colors." I didn't understand what she meant until years later. Those little comments accumulated like invisible weights. Vanessa was described as elegant. I was described as determined. She was graceful. I was resilient. People believed compliments erased comparisons. They never did. When college graduation arrived, my father's business partners congratulated Vanessa for simply entering the room. I had graduated at the top of my class. Someone finally turned toward me and said, "You're surprisingly articulate." I smiled politely. Inside, something quietly broke. Marcus was the first person who looked at me without comparing me to anyone else. He never introduced me as the billionaire's daughter. He never mentioned my degrees before mentioning my character. To him, I was simply Naomi. That was enough. One Saturday afternoon, we walked through a neighborhood farmer's market carrying reusable grocery bags. We calculated every purchase together: fresh vegetables, bread, chicken, a small bouquet of yellow flowers. I reached for my wallet. Marcus gently stopped me. "I've got the flowers. They're unnecessary." He shook his head. "No," he smiled. "They're important." I watched him spend the last $18 in his wallet on flowers instead of something for himself. No expensive necklace had ever made me feel that cherished. Sometimes I wondered whether my father had ever experienced this kind of peace. He certainly couldn't recognize it. The last conversation we had before the wedding replayed in my memory more often than I liked. "A teacher?" he had asked, barely hiding his disappointment. "He changes lives," I answered. "He earns $48,000 a year. He earns respect." My father leaned back in his leather chair. "Respect doesn't build wealth," I answered carefully. "No, it builds people." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "One day you'll understand." As it turned out, one day did come. Only I wasn't the one who needed the lesson. Marcus never complained about what we lacked. Instead, he celebrated what we had. When the washing machine overflowed, he fixed it after watching online tutorials. When my old laptop slowed down, he spent an entire evening repairing it instead of suggesting we buy another. When I doubted whether leaving my family had been worth the cost, he never offered empty reassurance. He simply sat beside me until the silence became comforting instead of painful. That kind of loyalty couldn't be purchased. It had to be lived. The people who called him poor only looked at his paycheck. They never noticed the richness of his patience, his honesty, his quiet confidence, or the way every student who saw him outside school ran over just to say hello. Walking beside him one evening, I realized something my former life had never taught me. Money could purchase luxury, status could command attention, influence could open doors, but none of those things guaranteed kindness. None guaranteed peace. None guaranteed love. The family I left behind believed Marcus had nothing to offer me. What they didn't know was that every ordinary day beside him was rebuilding parts of me that years of privilege had quietly broken. The man they called poor was quietly teaching me what real wealth actually looked like. The empire begins to crack. 6 months after my wedding, I stopped measuring my life by what I had lost. Instead, I measured it by what I had gained. Marcus and I had settled into a rhythm that felt ordinary in the best possible way. We shared morning coffee before work, argued playfully over whose turn it was to cook dinner, and celebrated every small victory as though it deserved a parade. Peace had become our greatest luxury. One rainy Tuesday morning, that peace was interrupted by an unexpected headline. Brooks Capital announces record expansion under new executive Ethan Bradford. I stared at the article while my coffee slowly cooled beside me. The accompanying photograph showed my father standing beside a tall, confident man with an expensive smile. Ethan Bradford looked exactly like the kind of executive financial magazines love to feature. Impeccably dressed, effortlessly charming, and surrounded by glowing descriptions of his business instincts, he appeared to be the perfect addition to my father's investment empire. Marcus noticed the expression on my face. "You know him?" "I've met him." "Should I be worried?" I folded the newspaper. "Not yet." The truth was, Ethan had always made me uneasy. We had first crossed paths years earlier at a corporate fundraising gala. He introduced himself with polished confidence before asking what I did for a living. "I'm a corporate attorney," I answered. His smile barely changed. "That's adorable." I waited. He continued. "I suppose reviewing contracts keeps you busy, but you'll probably never understand how real business works." The comment drew quiet laughter from several executives standing nearby. I simply smiled. "I understand enough to know that contracts exist, because people eventually stop telling the truth." His expression hardened for only a second before returning to practiced politeness. That brief moment told me more than his resume ever could. Some people hid arrogance behind confidence, others hid it behind charm. Ethan managed to do both. As the weeks passed, Brooks Capital continued appearing in business news. My father praised Ethan during every interview. "He's bringing fresh vision to the company. Our investors have tremendous confidence in him. He's helping position us for another decade of growth." Those interviews sounded impressive. The financial statements did not. As part of my legal consulting work, I regularly reviewed public corporate filings from major investment firms. It wasn't unusual. It was simply good practice. One evening, while preparing research for an unrelated client, I noticed something odd inside Brooks Capital's quarterly disclosures. Management fees had increased dramatically. Operating expenses had nearly doubled. Yet overall profitability had declined. The explanation provided to shareholders felt unusually vague. I read the report again. Then a third time, Marcus looked over from the couch. "You've been staring at that document for 20 minutes. I don't like numbers that refuse to explain themselves." He smiled. "I've learned that usually means you're about to find something. I hope I'm wrong." But I rarely was. During the following month, more stories surfaced. Brooks Capital quietly closed 2 regional offices. Several longtime employees accepted voluntary retirement packages. Anonymous online discussions mentioned delayed pension contributions. None of those events proved wrongdoing. Together, however, they formed a pattern. Patterns mattered. One afternoon, I attended a legal conference downtown where several corporate attorneys gathered between presentations. Conversations drifted naturally toward current business news. Someone mentioned Brooks Capital. Another attorney lowered his voice. "I've heard they're experiencing liquidity issues." His colleague shook her head. "No, investors are still confident. Publicly, maybe." The room fell silent for a moment. Everyone understood the difference between public confidence and private concern. Financial reputations rarely collapsed overnight. They cracked first. Then they shattered. A week later, I unexpectedly encountered Ethan in the lobby of a downtown office tower. He recognized me immediately. "Naomi." His smile looked rehearsed. "I heard you're doing independent consulting now." "I am." Must be quite an adjustment after leaving all that family money behind. I sleep well, I'm glad. He straightened his tailored jacket. Although consulting isn't exactly the same as building an empire, I met his eyes. No, it isn't. He leaned slightly closer. Then again, legal people usually analyze success after someone else creates it. His confidence invited disagreement. I gave him none. I hope your confidence is supported by accurate bookkeeping. For the first time, his smile disappeared completely. What exactly is that supposed to mean? It means good records protect honest executives. Before he could answer, I stepped into the waiting elevator. The doors closed between us. Marcus laughed when I told him about the conversation later that evening. You really know how to unsettle people. I didn't accuse him of anything. No. You simply reminded him that facts eventually catch everyone. Exactly, because facts didn't care about charisma, or magazine covers, or expensive suits. Over the next several weeks, reports from former Brooks Capital employees became harder to ignore. One accountant quietly resigned after 15 years. A retirement administrator disappeared without explanation. Families who depended on company pension plans began receiving letters announcing delays in scheduled payments. Those weren't wealthy investors. They were ordinary people, administrative assistants, maintenance workers, receptionists, drivers, people who had trusted the company with decades of retirement savings. They had absolutely no idea that something dangerous was unfolding inside executive offices. My father remained convinced Ethan was protecting the business. My mother insisted I had abandoned the family when they needed loyalty most. Vanessa proudly defended Ethan at every opportunity, calling him the smartest executive Dad has ever hired. None of them noticed what I was beginning to see. Behind every polished presentation, another inconsistency appeared. Behind every optimistic press release, another financial question remained unanswered. Late one Friday night, I spread public filings, earnings reports, and regulatory disclosures across our dining table. Marcus placed a fresh cup of tea beside me without interrupting my concentration. I compared dates, transfers, expense categories, executive compensation, investment write-downs. The figures finally aligned, not perfectly, but enough. I leaned back slowly. The numbers weren't lying. Someone inside the company was stealing millions. The envelope Grandma told me never to open early. The hardest part about betrayal wasn't losing people. It was finally accepting that they had been gone long before they walked away. That realization settled over me one cold Thursday evening as rain tapped softly against the living room window. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Marcus had stayed late at school to supervise the debate team, leaving me alone with my thoughts for the first time in weeks. The silence gave my memories room to breathe. Earlier that afternoon, I had crossed paths with my family at a charity luncheon benefiting inner-city schools. Ironically, Marcus's students were among the scholarship recipients, yet my father barely acknowledged the work they had done. Instead, he greeted me with the same measured disappointment he had worn on my wedding day. "So," he said, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, "are you finally ready to admit you made a mistake?" I met his eyes without flinching. No. His jaw tightened. Pride is expensive, so is arrogance. Before he could answer, my mother stepped between us with the polished smile she reserved for public events. "Naomi," she said, "your father is only trying to help. You don't have to keep proving a point. I stopped trying to prove anything months ago." Vanessa joined them moments later, wearing another designer dress that drew admiring glances from nearly everyone in the ballroom. "I heard your apartment building had plumbing problems," she said, with a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "I hope things get easier. They already have." She frowned. "I don't understand. I finally know what peace feels like." For the first time, none of them had a response. They simply looked at me as though I had spoken a language they had never learned. I left before dessert was served. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement, while windshield wipers swept away the rain in steady rhythm. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Not physically, emotionally. For years, I had chased approval that always seemed just beyond reach. Another degree, another promotion, another achievement. Every milestone earned another expectation instead of another embrace. By the time I reached our apartment, I understood something that frightened me. I no longer expected my family to change. That acceptance hurt, but it also felt strangely freeing. I changed into comfortable clothes and walked toward the small bookshelf in our bedroom. On the highest shelf sat a cedar box that had remained untouched since my wedding. My grandmother had given it to me 2 weeks before she passed away. I could still hear her gentle voice. Don't open it because you're curious. Open it when betrayal is no longer a possibility. Open it when it becomes the truth. For 6 months, I had honored that promise. Tonight, my hands reached for the box without hesitation. The brass latch clicked softly. Inside rested a single cream-colored envelope, sealed with dark blue wax bearing our family's original crest. My name appeared across the front in Grandma's elegant handwriting. For Naomi. Only when your heart finally stops asking permission to be loved. I closed my eyes. Then I carefully broke the seal. The first document was a handwritten letter. My grandmother's words carried the same warmth they always had. If you are reading this, then the people I hoped would choose love have chosen pride instead. A tear rolled down my cheek. I brushed it away before reading further. Never mistake rejection for your true value. Some people cannot recognize treasure because they only know how to count money. Beneath the letter rested several neatly organized folders. Each carried handwritten labels, trust amendments, ownership records, private agreements. I spread them carefully across the dining table. Years of practicing corporate law had trained me to recognize important documents within seconds. These weren't sentimental keepsakes. They were legally executed instruments. Every signature had been notarized. Every amendment had been properly witnessed. Every filing referenced legitimate corporate entities tied to Brooks Capital. I slowed my breathing. Grandma hadn't simply written me a farewell letter. She had left me a roadmap. Hidden among the paperwork was a small metal flash drive, secured inside a velvet pouch. A note rested beneath it. If they ever place blind trust in the wrong hands, this will help you protect what truly matters. Not their fortune, not their reputation, what truly mattered. I inserted the drive into my laptop. Dozens of encrypted folders appeared. Historical board minutes, ownership transfers, private correspondence, estate planning memorandums, confidential legal opinions. Everything had been cataloged with remarkable precision. Grandma had quietly documented decades of decisions inside the family business. She had anticipated conflicts long before anyone else recognized them. One file immediately caught my attention. Protective voting structure. I opened it. As the language unfolded across the screen, my pulse slowed instead of quickening. Certain voting rights attached to specific trust interests could not legally be exercised without conditions that had never been publicly disclosed. Another document referenced contingent ownership provisions triggered by financial misconduct involving senior executives. I leaned back slowly. This wasn't a weapon built for revenge. It was a shield built for accountability. Grandma hadn't expected perfection from our family. She had expected temptation, and she had prepared accordingly. The apartment door opened quietly. Marcus stepped inside carrying his worn leather satchel. He noticed the documents covering the table and removed his coat without asking unnecessary questions. You opened it. I did. He walked over, kissed my forehead, and looked at the papers. What did she leave you? I looked at the letter once more before answering. Not permission to destroy them. He nodded. Permission to stop protecting their lies. Exactly. For months, I had been grieving the family I wished I had. Now I could finally see the family I actually had. One had abandoned me. The other had quietly prepared me to survive. The sadness remained, but it no longer controlled me. Something colder replaced it, not hatred, clarity. For the first time since my wedding, I stopped asking how to earn my father's approval. Instead, I began asking the only question that truly mattered. How do I protect innocent people from the consequences of his blindness? Outside, the rain finally stopped. The city lights reflected against the windows like thousands of quiet promises waiting for dawn. I gathered the documents into careful stacks, placed the flash drive beside my laptop, and opened a fresh legal notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote 3 words: evidence, strategy, justice. That night, I stopped being their rejected daughter. I became their greatest legal threat. They invited me back to humiliate me. The invitation arrived at exactly 8:12 a.m. on a Monday. Not a phone call, not an apology, not even a message asking how I had been. It was a formal email from Brooks Capital's corporate secretary marked Wargent, Board Meeting Notice. My name appeared alongside a list of executives, outside counsel, and board observers. At the bottom, a single sentence caught my attention. Your attendance is strongly recommended in light of recent developments. I read it twice before quietly closing my laptop. Marcus looked up from the kitchen table, where he was grading history essays. They finally reached out? They did. What do they want? I gave a small smile. They're about 6 months too late to want me. He studied my face for a moment. So they need something, I nodded. They always confuse need with love. That afternoon, another message arrived. This one came directly from my father. This meeting concerns the future of the company. Set your personal feelings aside and attend. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the wedding, no mention of the daughter he had publicly disowned. Only business, only control. They still believed every relationship could be managed like a balance sheet. What they didn't know was that I had already spent weeks studying the documents Grandma left behind. Every evening after work, I compared corporate filings, trust agreements, board resolutions, and financial statements. The puzzle was becoming clearer with every page. Something inside Brooks Capital wasn't simply failing, it was being manipulated. By Wednesday morning, financial news outlets were reporting another sharp decline in investor confidence. Anonymous sources mentioned internal disagreements among senior leadership. Analysts questioned unusual expense increases and inconsistent quarterly projections. The company my father had spent 40 years building was beginning to crack under its own weight. Yet he still couldn't see where the danger truly lived. The board meeting was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on Friday. I chose a navy suit with clean lines and simple pearl earrings. There was nothing flashy about the outfit. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It reminded me of who I had become. Marcus stood beside the front door as I gathered my briefcase. He straightened the collar of my jacket with the same care he showed when helping one of his students prepare for a debate competition. "You look ready." "I feel ready," he smiled. "Good." Then he took both of my hands. "Remember something." I waited. "Queens never fight for crowns that already belong to them." The words settled every remaining doubt inside me. I kissed his cheek. "I'll be home for dinner, I know." "And Naomi?" "Yes? You don't have to prove your worth in that room." "I won't." Because I finally understood that confidence didn't require an audience. The Brooks Capital headquarters looked exactly as I remembered. Glass walls reflected the afternoon sunlight. Uniformed attendants opened polished doors. Employees hurried across the marble lobby carrying folders and tablets, pretending everything remained normal. But I noticed the details most people ignored. Forced smiles, whispered conversations, anxiety hidden beneath professional manners. Organizations often revealed their greatest fears without saying a word. As I entered the executive conference floor, several board members looked visibly surprised to see me. Some offered polite nods. Others quickly looked away. My mother approached first. Her expression carried concern, though I couldn't tell whether it was genuine or carefully rehearsed. "I'm glad you came. I was invited." She hesitated. "Your father has been under tremendous pressure." "I imagine he has. You could make today easier." I looked at her quietly. "For whom?" Before she could answer, my father entered the hallway. He looked older than I remembered. Not weaker, simply tired. Stress had settled into the lines around his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said. The words sounded unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. "I assume this isn't a social visit." "No." He adjusted his tie. "The company needs experienced legal guidance." I almost smiled. 6 months earlier, my legal career had been dismissed as insignificant. Now, it had suddenly become valuable. Interesting how quickly opinions changed when consequences arrived. The conference room doors opened. Inside, nearly 20 people sat around the long walnut table. Outside, counsel, independent directors, senior executives, audit committee members, and at the far end of the room sat Ethan Bradford. He greeted me with effortless confidence. "Naomi." "Ethan." He leaned back comfortably in his chair. "I heard consulting has been keeping you busy." "It has. I suppose reviewing contracts is useful experience." His smile widened. "Although situations like this require people who understand actual business leadership." Several nervous laughs circled the room. I remained silent. He continued anyway. "The board appreciates your attendance, but let's avoid unnecessary legal drama." I wasn't aware legal compliance qualified as drama. His smile thinned. "I'm simply suggesting you stay within your area of expertise. I always do." He folded his hands. "Good, because interfering with executive decision-making could expose you to liability." There it was, not confidence, a warning, perhaps even a threat. I noticed several board members exchange uneasy glances. Threatening an attorney in a room full of witnesses rarely demonstrated wisdom. Ethan either didn't realize that, or he believed himself untouchable. Either possibility benefited me. My father attempted to redirect the discussion. "We're here to stabilize the company." Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Our recent challenges are temporary. The market will recover. Investors simply need confidence. His presentation began. Charts filled the large screen. Revenue projections, growth forecasts, recovery strategies. The numbers looked polished, too polished. I had already compared many of them against publicly available filings. Several figures simply didn't reconcile. But this wasn't the moment to challenge him. Not yet. People reveal far more when they believe no one is questioning them. So I listened. I took notes. I asked almost nothing. They interpreted my silence as uncertainty. It wasn't. It was preparation. Throughout the meeting, Ethan grew increasingly comfortable. He interrupted directors, dismissed concerns, corrected experienced executives with theatrical confidence. Arrogance has a predictable habit. The longer it goes unchallenged, the more reckless it becomes. By the meeting's conclusion, my father looked exhausted. My mother avoided my eyes. Even Vanessa seemed less certain than before. Only Ethan appeared completely satisfied. As everyone gathered their papers, he walked past me. I hope today helped you understand how complicated running a real company can be. I closed my notebook. It helped me understand many things. I'm sure it did. He walked away smiling. He believed he had won. He believed I had attended merely to observe. He believed the woman his family once rejected had returned with nothing except opinions. They had absolutely no idea what rested inside my briefcase. Trust documents, ownership records, forensic notes, and evidence waiting for the right moment. I walked into that boardroom carrying everything needed to destroy the lies. They still believed I came empty-handed. Chapter 6. Silence was my loudest weapon. The emergency shareholders meeting began at exactly 9:00 a.m. on a gray Tuesday morning. By 8:30, every seat inside Brooks Capital's executive auditorium was occupied. Major investors sat beside retired judges. Corporate attorneys quietly reviewed briefing folders. Bank executives exchanged cautious whispers, while financial journalists prepared notebooks and cameras outside the main hall. Community leaders representing employee pension groups filled the back rows, hoping the rumors surrounding the company were exaggerated. They weren't. I arrived at 8:47 a.m. wearing a tailored navy suit, a white silk blouse, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me on my law school graduation day. I carried only one leather briefcase. To everyone else, it looked ordinary. They had absolutely no idea what rested inside. My attorney, Denise Carter, met me near the entrance. She had spent 20 years handling complex corporate litigation and possessed the rare ability to remain completely composed under pressure. "Everything is authenticated," she said quietly. "The forensic accounting reports? Verified. The trust documents? Certified copies. The banking records? Every transfer has already been confirmed." I nodded once. "Then we wait." Inside the auditorium, my father stood near the stage speaking with directors. His shoulders appeared heavier than I had ever seen them. When our eyes met across the room, neither of us smiled. There was nothing left to pretend. My mother avoided looking at me entirely. Vanessa remained beside Ethan Bradford, laughing politely at something he had said. He looked confident, too confident. Confidence built on deception usually collapses the moment truth enters the room. The chairman opened the meeting promptly. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this emergency shareholders session." Formal introductions followed. Financial summaries appeared across enormous projection screens. Revenue forecasts, cash flow statements, investment performance. Everything looked polished, too polished. Ethan stepped confidently toward the podium. His tailored charcoal suit looked flawless beneath the stage lighting. "So much unnecessary concern has surrounded Brooks Capital," he began. "I am pleased to report that our restructuring efforts remain firmly on schedule." Colorful charts appeared behind him. "Our temporary liquidity pressures have been dramatically overstated." He smiled toward the investors. "The fundamentals of this company remain exceptionally strong." Several people nodded. Others continued writing notes. I remained still. Ethan continued presenting projected earnings, anticipated acquisitions, and optimistic recovery plans. Every number sounded convincing. Every conclusion felt rehearsed. Then his attention shifted toward me. "Some individuals," he said with an easy smile, "have attempted to create uncertainty without possessing the operational experience necessary to understand executive decision-making." Several heads turned toward my seat. He continued, "Reviewing contracts and building multinational investment firms require very different skill sets." A few uncomfortable laughs echoed across the room. He wasn't finished. "I certainly respect legal professionals." He paused. "But fear often causes people to mistake suspicion for evidence." His eyes settled directly on mine. "I hope everyone here recognizes that." The room became quiet. People waited for me to answer. I didn't. I folded my hands together and continued listening. Ethan's smile widened. He interpreted my silence exactly the way arrogant people usually do, as weakness. He resumed speaking. Our accounting practices have undergone routine review. Our executive compensation follows industry standards. Every transaction has complied with applicable corporate governance requirements. Then he made his mistake. The allegations circulating about unauthorized transfers are completely fictional. I looked toward Denise. She gave a nearly invisible nod. The moment had arrived. Without saying a single word, I opened my briefcase. Denise quietly stood. She began distributing identical folders to every board member, every independent director, every major investor, and every attorney present. The movement spread across the room almost silently. Paper replaced conversation. Curiosity replaced confidence. Ethan stopped speaking. What exactly is this? Still, I said nothing. The chairman adjusted his glasses and opened a folder. Inside rested authenticated banking records, independent forensic accounting reports, wire transfer confirmations, internal authorization logs, certified ownership documents, and my grandmother's trust amendments. Each document carried proper certifications and supporting exhibits. No speculation, only evidence. One director turned another page. His expression changed immediately. A banker quietly removed his reading glasses before putting them back on again. Someone near the back whispered, "My God." Ethan attempted to recover. These documents have clearly been taken out of context. No one answered him. Denise finally spoke. Every exhibit has been independently authenticated. She remained calm. The forensic accounting analysis was completed by an external auditing firm. Another page turned. The room grew even quieter. The report identified dozens of unauthorized transfers routed through shell corporations connected to Ethan's private investment partnerships. Millions of dollars had disappeared over several reporting periods. Each transfer carried executive approval codes. Each approval originated from Ethan's office. My father stared at the documents without moving. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "No," he whispered. "That can't be right." The lead auditor rose from his seat. "We verified each transaction independently. The supporting banking institutions confirmed the transfers." Ethan's confident smile finally disappeared. Those payments represented legitimate consulting agreements. One investor immediately responded. "Then, why weren't they disclosed to shareholders?" Ethan hesitated. "They were categorized differently." Another attorney spoke. "Under which accounting standard?" No answer. The questions multiplied. Who authorized these entities? Why were pension reserves reduced? Who approved these wire instructions? Every response Ethan attempted created another contradiction. He insisted certain transfers never occurred. The banking confirmations proved they had. He claimed board approval existed. The official minutes showed otherwise. He argued that ownership authority rested solely with executive management. Then, the chairman reached the final section inside the folder. My grandmother's documents. Silence settled across the auditorium. The trust amendments established protective voting provisions that automatically suspended executive authority whenever documented financial misconduct threatened company assets. Those provisions had remained dormant for years. Until now, a retired judge slowly removed his glasses. These amendments are enforceable. An attorney beside him nodded. They were properly executed. My father's face lost all remaining color. He looked toward me for the first time that morning. Not with anger, with realization. He finally understood. Grandma had anticipated exactly this possibility. She had protected the company long before anyone recognized the danger. Vanessa looked toward Ethan in disbelief. "You told us everything was under control." "It was." His voice cracked. "It still is." No one believed him. The chairman requested security personnel enter the room. Two investigators approached quietly. Ethan stepped backward. "This is outrageous." "No," Denise replied evenly. "This is documented." He turned toward my father. "Victor, say something." My father couldn't. Every page before him carried undeniable proof. Years earlier, he had taught me that business depended upon evidence rather than emotion. Today, that lesson had returned to him. Only this time, it carried consequences. The chairman announced that Ethan Bradford's executive authority was immediately suspended pending regulatory investigation. Additional motions followed. Independent auditors assumed temporary control of financial records. Outside counsel notified federal authorities. Employee pension assets received emergency legal protection. No applause followed, only silence. Heavy, unavoidable, final. As people slowly stood from their seats, journalists rushed toward the exits to report the unfolding story. Investors gathered around legal counsel. Board members quietly apologized to employees they had once ignored. My mother remained frozen. Vanessa stared at the table. My father never looked away from the documents. I closed my briefcase. Everything that needed to be said had already been proven. There was nothing left for me to argue, nothing left to celebrate. Justice rarely sounds dramatic. Sometimes it arrives as quietly as a page turning. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Ethan behind me one final time. You planned this. I paused without turning around. No, I answered softly. You planned it yourself. Then I kept walking. No one remembered Ethan's final excuse. Everyone remembered my silence. If you'd like, I can also help make the final 2 chapters even more emotionally satisfying while keeping the story coherent and original. Chapter 7. Crowns Aren't Made of Diamonds. The morning after the shareholders' meeting, Brooks Capital no longer belonged to headlines celebrating success. It belonged to investigations. By 7:15 a.m., federal agents had entered the company's headquarters with sealed warrants. Financial regulators secured accounting servers, while forensic investigators copied years of electronic records. The television in our living room played the same breaking news on every major network. Brooks Capital under federal investigation. Marcus muted the volume and placed a plate of toast in front of me. You should eat. I smiled faintly. I'll try. He sat beside me instead of across from me. He always understood that support didn't require speeches. Sometimes it only required presence. Throughout the day, more details became public. Ethan Bradford had been formally charged with multiple counts of financial fraud, wire fraud, and making false statements during corporate proceedings. Ironically, several of the strongest pieces of evidence came from his own confident presentations and recorded executive meetings. He had spent months convincing everyone he controlled the narrative. Instead, he had carefully documented his own downfall. The investigators didn't need dramatic confessions. They only needed the truth he had already placed on record. My father called that afternoon. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. I should have listened. His voice sounded older than I remembered, not because of age, because certainty had left him. I warned you about Ethan, I answered gently. You did. I thought I knew people. He paused. I confused confidence with character. I closed my eyes. That single sentence carried more honesty than anything he had said in years. I'm sorry, Naomi. The apology didn't erase the wedding. It didn't restore the years of conditional love. But it was real. And sometimes reality mattered more than perfection. 2 days later, the board of directors held another emergency meeting. This time, there were no standing ovations or polished speeches. The directors unanimously voted to remove my father as chief executive officer while the company completed its restructuring. He accepted the decision without argument. Walking away from the office he had occupied for nearly 4 decades seemed to age him overnight. For the first time, he wasn't the man everyone feared disappointing. He was simply a father confronting the consequences of his own choices. My mother's world changed just as quickly. The charity galas stopped calling. Private clubs quietly removed her from leadership committees. The invitations that had once filled her calendar disappeared almost completely. She had spent years protecting appearances. Now appearances offered no protection in return. Vanessa struggled in a different way. Without our father's influence shielding every opportunity, she discovered that respect couldn't be inherited. It had to be earned. One afternoon she visited our house unexpectedly. She stood awkwardly on the front porch, looking at the small flower garden Marcus had planted beside the steps. I never understood why you left all that money, she admitted. I handed her a cup of tea. I didn't leave money. I chose peace. She looked around our modest home. Family photographs covered the walls. Books filled simple wooden shelves. The kitchen smelled like fresh bread Marcus had baked that morning. It feels different here, she whispered. It is. For the first time, I'm surrounded by people who don't measure love by status. She lowered her eyes. I wish I had understood that sooner. So do I. The legal work, however, had only begun. Rather than accepting the board's invitation to become the company's next chief executive, I proposed something entirely different. Employee pensions would receive immediate legal protection through an independent restructuring trust supervised by outside fiduciaries. Retirement funds would remain separated from executive operating accounts. New governance policies would require transparent oversight and independent auditing. No single executive would ever again possess the unchecked authority Ethan had abused. Several directors questioned whether I wanted control of Brooks Capital. I answered honestly, no. I want accountability. The proposal passed unanimously. Walking out of the meeting, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't carrying revenge. I was carrying closure. That evening, Marcus and I sat together on our back porch as the sun disappeared beyond the neighborhood rooftops. Children laughed somewhere down the street. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the yard. Marcus reached for my hand. "You could have had everything." I looked toward our little house. The mortgage wasn't fully paid. The furniture didn't match. Our savings account would never appear on magazine covers. Yet I had never felt wealthier. "I already do." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. For years, my family believed diamonds represented success. Luxury represented victory. Power represented worth. They were wrong. Real wealth looked like trust. Real success sounded like laughter inside an ordinary home. Real love never demanded that I become someone else to deserve it." As twilight settled around us, I realized the greatest inheritance my grandmother had ever given me wasn't hidden inside legal documents. It was the courage to choose character over comfort. The fortune I lost had purchased beautiful things. The life I found gave me something infinitely more valuable. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval to know exactly who I was. Chapter 8. The queen I became. Months have passed since the day truth quietly dismantled the empire my father spent a lifetime building. People often ask whether revenge felt satisfying. The honest answer surprises them. Justice brought peace. Revenge would never have healed me. Healing began the moment I stopped measuring my worth through the eyes of people who had only ever loved me conditionally. Life moved forward in ways I never expected. My father no longer appeared on magazine covers celebrating billion-dollar deals. Instead, I occasionally saw him at neighborhood community events or quietly volunteering with organizations that supported financial literacy programs for young entrepreneurs. The expensive suits remained in his closet more often than on his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he seemed interested in building people instead of portfolios. Our conversations were still careful. Some wounds required time instead of promises, but they were honest. One afternoon, we shared coffee without discussing business once. He looked across the table and smiled gently. "I spent decades trying to leave my children an empire." He paused before continuing. "I should have spent more time trying to leave them wisdom." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Neither of us pretended the past could be erased. We simply chose not to let it define our future. My mother faced a different journey. The social circles she once guarded so fiercely had grown remarkably quiet after the scandal. Without constant invitations and elite gatherings, she finally had room to confront uncomfortable truths she had spent years avoiding. One evening, she visited our home alone. She stood silently in front of an old family photograph hanging in our hallway. "I used to believe I was protecting Vanessa," she whispered. I waited. I never realized I was hurting both of my daughters. The silence between us felt heavy, not with anger, with understanding. She admitted something I had waited years to hear. Colorism had shaped countless decisions inside our home. Compliments had never been equally given. Expectations had never been equally shared. Love had never been equally expressed. Recognizing those truths could not rewrite my childhood, but acknowledging them mattered. Growth always begins with honesty. Vanessa surprised me the most. For the first time in her life, she accepted a position at a nonprofit financial education organization without asking our family to open doors for her. She worked long hours, earned every promotion herself, and slowly discovered the confidence that only genuine effort can create. One afternoon, she laughed while helping Marcus repaint our backyard fence. "I finally understand why you walked away." I smiled. "It wasn't easy, I know." She dipped her brush into the paint bucket, but maybe easy was never the point. I couldn't have said it better myself. As for Ethan Bradford, the headlines eventually stopped celebrating his confidence and began documenting his conviction. Court proceedings revealed years of deception, fraudulent transfers, and deliberate manipulation of corporate assets. The same arrogance that once impressed investors ultimately convinced the jury of his guilt. His name became a lesson instead of a legend. Meanwhile, Marcus and I continued living in the same modest home where our greatest luxuries remained wonderfully ordinary. Saturday breakfasts stretched into long conversations. Fresh flowers still appeared on our kitchen table, even when money was tight. The laughter of neighbors drifted through open windows during warm evenings. Children from Marcus's school often stopped by after graduation to thank the teacher who had believed in them before anyone else did. Watching those moments reminded me that influence measured in lives changed would always outlast influence measured in dollars earned. Looking back now, I realize my wedding was never the day I lost everything. It was the day I finally stopped carrying expectations that were never mine to fulfill. If you're listening to my story today, while wondering whether choosing integrity will cost you something, let me answer honestly. It probably will. You may lose approval, you may lose comfort, you may even lose people you believed would stand beside you forever. But never confuse those losses with failure. Sometimes life removes what is temporary so you can recognize what is eternal. Choose the people who celebrate your character before your success. Choose peace before prestige. Choose love that remains when the money disappears. And above all, never allow someone else's opinion to become the measure of your value. I never wore diamonds. I never inherited the empire everyone expected me to rule. Yet, every morning I wake beside a man who reminds me, without saying a word, that I was always enough. That became the greatest victory of my life. Diamonds can decorate your hands, but only real love can place a crown on your soul.